Pipeline acceleration was always about showing up consistently with the right message to the right people, even before they knew that they needed you. AI just makes it possible to actually do that. Hello and welcome to the Health Tech Marketing Show. I'm your host, Adam Chirinas. I'm the CEO and founder of Health Launchpad. Thank you, as always, for listening. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope you get as much out of listening to this as I get out of doing it, because I love it. I also want to give a big thank you to our friends and sponsors, the wonderful people at Healthcare Now Radio, the 24/7 online radio station dedicated to all things healthcare. Now, today's episode is a little different. Instead of a brand new interview, we're going back into the archives, and I'm going to replay an episode from last year that was really popular. I want to tell you why I'm going back into the archives. So the episode on pipeline acceleration and optimization, it featured two really great guests, Amy Swanson and Michael Passanante, both really seasoned health tech marketing leaders who have got deep experience in building and scaling pipeline in this really tough industry we live in. And that episode quietly became one of our most listened to episodes. And I really can understand why. People kept sharing it, referencing it, coming back to it. And honestly, when I listened to it recently, I completely understood why. Because the conversation Amy and Michael had about pipeline goals, about buying committees, about BDR alignment, about brand versus demand, none of that has dated. And if anything, in the current environment, with sales cycles, certainly not getting any shorter, and budgets not really getting any fatter. And there's even greater pressure on marketing to demonstrate revenue impact. And so it feels like an episode that's even more relevant than ever. And so I thought it would be good to bring it back. And here's what I've done. And this is what I'm kind of excited about. At the end of the episode, I'm going to go back and give you the 4 key takeaways from the conversation. I think there are things that you kind of want to take away from this and start to figure out how to act on. But I'm also going to explain some of the things that you could explore from an AI standpoint, maybe even some of the other episodes that can help you with that. Because, while AI was certainly a big thing when we did this episode last year, it's come on leaps and bounds. And so I wanted to apply that lens when in revisiting it. And what we'll be doing is talking about things like agentic workflows, AI-powered lead scoring, signal intelligence, and some stuff that some of it's forward thinking and some of it's stuff that's happening right now. So with that, let's get into the episode and hear what they have to say.
So excited to be here, and thank you, Adam, for that great introduction. And Amy and Michael, we talked over the last few weeks about pipeline, and I'm so excited to talk about it today because it gets even more attention in times of economic uncertainty. And so right now, in many organizations, the executives are looking at pipeline, they're looking at pipeline creation. Are we having the right goals? Do we need to reset? How are we tracking? And what's the ownership? Like, there's a lot more pushing in organizations between marketing, sales, and sometimes even customer experience on how to get towards the goal. So really looking forward to talk about that today. And let's start with the questions. I think, Amy, you talk about the pipeline goals and getting them towards your team. Can you share with us a little bit on how do you make sure that your team is aware, and how do you then make sure also that they track on these goals and the metrics, and it becomes an important part of their thinking when they're doing their day-to-day job?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. I think, first and foremost, pipeline is a shared responsibility. So understanding the goals, the company vision, and the strategy, and really making sure that the team is aligned to those goals is super important. I always like to say the why behind the goals is actually more important than the goals themselves. So really understanding not only why we're doing these things, and then how we're going to achieve those things is super important. I think first and foremost, integrating the pipeline goals into the strategic planning process is really key. And having the team be a part of that, collaborating to really understand what we're trying to accomplish and how we're going to get there, and then what piece each of the people owns within that process. I think also giving insight into how you essentially reverse engineer to the goal. So you can't just start with the goal. You have to really understand the component parts of that goal, what you're going to do to achieve those things, and then who again is responsible for those. And it's really critical to have that ongoing dialogue to ensure that that's a key part of every planning meeting, as well as every stand up, every one on one, every discussion, so that it's just an ongoing built in part of the process. And through those regular touch points, you can really not only ensure that people understand the goal, and especially if any of those goals happen to change, but then really understand any obstacles or challenges to achieving those goals.
Thank you, Amy. Michael, you mentioned that the deals, the opportunities with marketing influence, you've recognized that those are closing at a higher rate. Can you share a little bit more about how do you measure that and how do you actually qualify that this is happening?
Absolutely. So we spent quite a bit of time wiring up our tech stack to ensure that we are able to track engagement at the contact level and then subsequently rolled to the account level. So we have a good understanding of the folks that are involved in the buying committee and how they're involved in the individual opportunities and how well we're doing getting to those people, getting them engaged prior to them even becoming an opportunity and then helping walk them through to the end. And that's everything that we can track, right? So it could be emails, webinar engagement, could be social media engagement, could be engagement with our sales enablement offerings and collateral. We're looking to continue to build that momentum, right, through the process. And so what we see and what we measure as part of our overall KPI look is here are the deals where marketing has shown some clear influence, where those buying committee members have been engaged. We can very easily look at the flip side of that and see which ones are not touching or getting involved in anything that marketing's producing, and very easily then correlate how well are they closing if they're in one or the other bucket. And as you mentioned, it's pretty easy to tell that when they're involved in our story, that they tend to close at a higher rate.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Amy, you talked about a scorecard. I think you even said it's a collaborative scorecard where you have multiple departments working together. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, many years ago, I created what I originally called the marketing scorecard, and it became really clear that it couldn't just be a marketing scorecard because so many different departments are involved in pipeline generation and in growth for the company. It really became a collaboration and a collaborative effort between marketing, sales, business development teams, and now also customer success teams. So, the way I went about that was one, really have to understand the purpose of that scorecard. For me, it's a really powerful tool, as I mentioned, to align all those teams and to drive growth. That scorecard should be a key tool in generating not only metrics, but also insights, which are actually more important and drive better decision making throughout and performance throughout the process. So it's really important to gain buy in when you develop a new tool. I recommend getting those key stakeholders, those teams together very early and really understanding the definitions behind what you're trying to accomplish. I find that fosters a sense of ownership. It helps define the benefits not only to my department and my team, but also across the various departments. And it helps people understand, again, how we're going to achieve those goals. And once you have those common definitions in that terminology, you can then get into the metrics that go behind those terms. And I've found in different companies, different teams, those definitions can vary. So again, just getting that common dialogue is really important. Once you align on those overall goals, then you can start to map out and design what that scorecard looks like. And I've found that many times you start with 3 or 4 metrics, and then over time you can iterate that and add the things that are critical to not only the long-term success of the company and achievement of those goals, but also things that might be future KPIs that you just simply don't have today and you'd like to work toward. I find that many leaders see that there's real value in that. It shows that you're not only focused on the short term, but also on the longer term. And then once you have the metrics and the definitions, then you can really talk about the reporting and the cadence of that reporting. And I find that story that you're trying to tell, especially at a leadership level, is really critical to be aligned on. So that, how you're going to share and visualize the metrics as well as the insights that you're gleaning from those metrics can be really important. And it can take the form of dashboards, can take the form of presentations, et cetera. But you just need to make sure that you have that transparency across the teams and that understanding at a leadership level. And I will say at a leadership level, it's absolutely critical in my experience to have that buy-in so that they can then champion what you're reporting on, and then also how that impacts performance. I would say it needs to be part of regularly scheduled touch points, as we discussed earlier, and it really needs to, if possible, fit into existing structures. So whether that's reporting structures, existing systems or software applications that you use, different processes, even onboarding and performance reviews. That avoids creating additional administrative burden and also helps people to really buy into that process. A couple last thoughts, Mark, some helpful reminders. This scorecard is never going to be complete. It's iterative. So as you develop new goals and objectives, you want to keep that in mind. Again, that senior leadership component is really key. When they understand what you're measuring, why you're doing that, and what that actually means for the success of the company, they're very likely to be advocates and to champion for that metric or that scorecard. And then lastly, use it as a tool to recognize and celebrate the team. You're going to have accomplishments that you want to really recognize, but it's also a great way to track progress. So that's how I've gone about it. And I'm sure there are a million different ways to do it, but that's what's worked for me.
Thank you so much, Amy. Really exciting, collaborative approach. And it also sets you up as a leader, but brings all people together when you present it upstream. So great approach there. Thank you so much for sharing that. Michael, you just mentioned this concept of the buying committee. And I think will be interesting, and particularly in light of building pipeline. At what point did you start tracking that? And how is your organization continuously looking that they have the right people in the buying committee and that they're marketing out towards the right individuals there?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I think we identified very early on in our process. Like most B2B situations, it's not one person that weighs in on the decision, right? There's many. So getting to understand the personas that were involved and how each of them plays into that decision became very important for us. And so early on, we wanted to make sure that as we developed our target accounts and started to think about ABM more holistically, that we were doing our due diligence to augment those target account records with the right people. And, you source them from a variety of different places, but the point being that you get them centered in there and that you really can start to understand that level of engagement across those accounts very early on. And again, the flip side of that, who's not lighting up? How are we not touching them? And so we look at that and we talk about that frequently. We have several hundred deals typically in our pipeline at any given time, but it's very easy to see, here's the ones that we are influencing. Here's the ones that we're not. If we haven't to that point, let's see if we can help it along, right? Why haven't we done that? What can we be doing? So you're using it as a diagnostic tool as well as a measurement tool in trying to understand where we're going, because as you mentioned before, we know when they're engaged in our story, and we know when we have more people involved, no surprise in that decision, they're more likely to tip in our favor. And so it's not just sort of a one point in time thing. It's looking at that longitudinally and trying to make sure that you're staying consistently engaged with those accounts.
Great. Thank you. Amy, we were talking about the role of BDRs in building pipeline and how they fit in towards what marketing is doing and what sales is doing. Maybe start by giving us a perspective of your view of the role of BDRs in this whole pipeline generation. And then secondly, maybe you can weave in there, based on that role, where would they fit best in the organization?
Yeah, great question, Mark. I think, for BDRs, I find that the best definition, or at least the most consistent definition, is a team or a person who are really focused on inbound. They are the final step, if you will, between marketing and sales, and really decide whether or not a lead is quote unquote qualified and moves forward in the process. Based on that definition, and I've found in my experience, BDRs really, there's something I call the Ron Weasley syndrome, which is that a lot of teams don't really understand the role of that character in the overall team. And so just like Ron Weasley, if you're familiar with the Harry Potter series, I think he struggled to be anything but Harry's best friend throughout the series and really had a difficult time understanding his role in the greater team and the greater storyline. So those BDRs really need to have role clarity and they can't suffer from that Ron Weasley syndrome so that they know where they fit in the organization best and what they contribute to the overall team goals. I will say that I think when BDRs report to sales, that structure can work, but they're primarily incentivized on quotas and short term activities, which makes sense, right? Because that's what sales is focused on. But that doesn't necessarily serve all the different purposes that marketing serves and the value that it drives within the organization. So, in my experience, I've found, especially for companies who are more focused on the overall patient or customer journey, that BDRs reporting in through the marketing organization is actually a better fit. It prevents Ron Weasley syndrome, but it also helps to nurture prospects on the front end directly into the early stages of the buyer's journey. It helps with messaging early on so that those prospects, when they become customers, are already accustomed to those on brand messages and content. And then on the back end, if the focus is on upsells and cross sells, it really helps with that continuity of message, but also that continuity of experience. And so for me, a BDR focused on not only inbound, but also on that overall customer journey, fitting that role into the marketing group tends to make more sense than it's sitting in sales.
Great. Thank you. Michael, you have a BDR team?
We do. Right now, it's a team of one. We're probably going to be expanding that. But yeah, I would be inclined to agree with Amy on that. I mean, when we think about our approach, and right now the BDR is in the marketing team, there's so much work that's done upstream that, and there's only so many accounts that are in market at any given time anyway, right? So the chance of him finding a bullseye or several bullseyes any day and creating a short-term opportunity out of that, it's kind of small. But what we have seen is over the time he's been doing this, that evolution where that early engagement layered on with other kinds of targeting and surrounding those people before they become opportunities makes a difference. We see people that he's frequently engaged with through LinkedIn or other types of venues, meeting them at conferences, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, an opportunity shows up in our pipeline, usually because we're, again, sort of disambiguated. We have a broker consultant between us and the end client. But so they don't necessarily call him back and say, hey, I want to get on the phone with you. But that constant engagement and movement kind of, creates that familiarity and pushes it along, no doubt. And so we're seeing more and more accounts showing up in our pipeline that he had engagement with long before they became opportunities, right? So again, correlate it, but to me, that's making a difference where we didn't see that before him being there.
Okay. Thank you. Let's stay with you, Michael. What advice would you give marketing leaders who want to get better alignment across the different teams on the pipeline metrics?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you need to do, I think, is make sure that your team understands that they have responsibility for pipeline, right? The activities of marketing are not divorced from the creation and the cultivation of pipeline. So they need to understand what the sales goals are. They need to understand, as Amy intimated, what the pipeline goals are, because they're going to be bigger than the sales goals, right? And what it takes to get there and what their role is in that, right? So those are hugely important. And then I think you need to understand how marketing plays into that and how your leadership views that, right? There's going to be certain situations, depending on the product that you have, where marketing is going to be very directly involved in specific discrete opportunity creation, right? We'll call those marketing attributed leads, right? Or marketing attributed business. And then there's going to be another end of the spectrum where marketing is a really more influential player in a very long tail, complex sale, perhaps. That's where I tend to find myself, right? And so as we calibrated our KPIs, it wasn't about how many opportunities can I create in the next 15 to 30 days, right? Because it takes months, maybe years to have something actually show up. And so we had to calibrate how we approach the market and what we measure and what marketing is ultimately responsible for to that thinking. And that, I think, helps get the teams aligned around what they can reasonably expect the marketing team to do in the course of those sales.
Great. Thank you. Amy, when Michael brought up this concept of translating the pipeline goals in towards marketing metrics, what's your point of view on that?
No, Michael's exactly right. You have to have alignment and also common language. And I found, especially when translating marketing KPIs to executive leadership, I need to really stay away from and have my teams stay away from what would be traditionally considered marketing jargon. A lot of times marketing will come in and say, hey, we generated X number of MQLs this month. And the leadership team may have very experience with MQLs or leads in general. And so I really try to focus more on business impact and say things more akin to the X number of leads that we generated this month represent a total potential pipeline value of X in dollars. And based on historical conversion rates, this contributes to our monthly revenue targets in this way. This helps them to really kind of translate what we're doing, the activities that we're doing, and not really be so transactional, but think more in terms of value proposition. When marketing can drive value and the executive leadership can understand that, and frankly, the whole team can understand that, I think it just goes a long way in making sure, again, as Michael said, that everyone's on the same page and that we have a common, set of terminology that we can use to define what we're doing.
Great. Thank you. Michael, as you look towards the different stages in pipeline, you had mentioned a number of different tools that your team is using across the pipeline and even at earlier stages. Can you share with us how those tools are helping and maybe even how that's improving sales velocity and some other like measurable metrics?
Yeah, sure. Velocity is an interesting question in our space because there is sort of a cadence to the way people buy their benefits. So it can be difficult to say, wow, we did this with them or they engaged in that and that increased, or reduced the amount of time by 10 or 20 days. It's not quite that discrete, but again, back to the overall idea of engagement. For instance, we have a CMS platform called Paperflight that we use, and that enables the sales team to both share individual pieces of collateral from that and track the movement and touch points of that collateral, in addition to creating what are essentially deal rooms where they can exchange information with clients and across their buying committee, right? What we see is tangible impact on that, right? We see once those assets begin to get shared, they also begin to get consumed, right? And they get consumed over and over through the course of the process. And I believe something that seems relatively simple like that makes a difference in the course of a deal where they're definitely going to be evaluating different vendors. And we're not the ones that are throwing PDF files over the wall at them, right? They're actually in an experience and they're engaging with our team and across their team at the customer site in a very specific way. And it's customized and to their look and their brand. And then it just tells them that we're more engaged with them as a company because our sales take a little while to close. So those kinds of things have certainly benefited us, I think, in the course of a deal and help to create a differentiated experience that they aren't typically going to get from competitors in our space.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, exciting how the technology is helping in that perspective. We were all talking about different influences between marketing and sales. Also, as we see more and more customer experience and your existing customers. So Amy would love to get your perspective on that and how they become part of the conversation, not only of like their number gets in there, but like what's the collaboration between marketing and customer experience and what have you done in that space?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I am seeing a growing importance of marketing in customer retention and customer retention goals. The old adage is it costs less to keep a customer than to create a new one. And it's a real balance, right, between marketing, which is already a small but mighty team in many cases, focused on acquisition and leads and things of that nature, and then retention. So I would say, one, the balance between where you focus your energy as a marketing team really depends on your company goals. In general, I tend to focus marketing investments on driving the most profitable long-term customer relationship. So whether you're measuring that in customer acquisition cost, customer lifetime value, whatever those metrics are, you really need to speak the language of your leadership team and really focus in your energy and your resources where it makes the most sense for the overall health of the company, both from a growth, but also a profitability standpoint.
Great. Thank you. Michael, any different perspective?
I think Amy nailed it. I mean, that's the key is calibrating your campaigns and your approach to making sure that you're aligned with the company goals. And that does tend to revolve around both sales and profitability, right? So that's the key and making sure that your team and your activities are aligned to that. It's very easy to stray. There's so many shiny objects in marketing. And, we all know, those of us that are practitioners of it, there are lots of opinions that come in from lots of different places about what you could and should do, right? And so that's where you need to have these KPIs at your side and alignment, because that helps insulate you from some of that chatter that can take you off point. because you can make that argument that you're trying to stay the course and here's how you need to do it. And that really will help in those situations. I found that to be extremely beneficial.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. I think the thinking of involving customer experience and retention is definitely something you see more and more over the last 5 years or so. I think the other part, which is getting more and more, is the shift of marketing's focus towards bringing more in towards the pipeline now to take a look towards the opportunities that are in pipeline and where can marketing help? How can we accelerate? So interested in that and in both of your opinions. Maybe Michael, we start with you.
Sure. I mean, certainly, we're in a company that's not quite 7 years and change in market, right? So we're at that arc now where retention's becoming a thing. It's not all, new acquisitions is obviously always key, but retention's becoming a thing. And so as our account managers are, getting deeper and deeper in that mode, frankly, there's a great synergy there between what marketing and our customer success / account management teams can do and how we all row together to keep those clients happy, to keep them informed and keep them in our camp. So absolute agreement and alignment there that there needs to be some time spent making sure that that happens. The other side of it is that sort of, new acquisition and engagement, and that never really goes away, right? So you have to balance that between what you're doing on the retention side, how you're pursuing that new engagement.
Amy, perspective on the opportunities that are in pipeline and how to accelerate those, how to make sure that they keep on moving?
Yeah, I mean, I think Michael raised a good point that the lead generation activities never go away, right? But what I try to tell my teams is, one, they never go away, but we also need to be smarter about what we're pushing into the pipeline so that we're spending our energy where it makes the most sense. So kind of related back to the earlier question. The other is that it seems like sales cycles are getting longer. I think Michael alluded to this as well. And so there's perceived time, I'll call it, the marketing teams have to devote to other activities. And so we definitely want to show value across the continuum, both pre and post sale. And so as we look at what it takes to retain a customer and also what it costs us to acquire a new customer, if you look at that, the math, the calculus is such that in many cases, it actually is more important to retain the customers than to push pipeline. And so one of the ways that we think about that is if we can actually develop fewer leads by retention of one customer or 10 customers or whatever it might be, or through different activities, growth activities such as upsell, cross-sell activities, that might actually be a better use of our scant marketing resources and drive more value overall for the company. So again, as Michael said, you're just constantly looking at what levers can you pull and what makes the most sense for the company's goals and objectives.
Great. Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Michael. I think we learned a lot today, and both of your perspective, most of the time aligned, but sometimes coming in towards it from a very different angle, super valuable. Maybe we close with some final thoughts and the recommendation for marketing leaders. If you want to drive pipeline, what are the critical points that you would recommend our marketing leaders pay close attention towards? Michael, let's start with you.
Pipeline doesn't start with an outbound email that someone responds to most of the time. If you talk about demand generation or demand creation, that's where you get into this whole, brand building conversation. And it's really important to balance your performance marketing with your brand. And that's going to be tough depending on your leadership and how they view that. But again, when you've got just a select number of buyers that are in market at that moment, you obviously want to capture that demand, but that demand starts way upstream. And so when you're thinking about how to allocate your resources, you want to make sure that you're engaging the marketplace where they are. And that may not always be in a buying mode, but if you're building pipeline, that's, again, you can't get yourself into this mode that pipeline is a narrow window. It starts way in advance. And so I would suggest that you definitely spend time on building out the content and building out the muscle to make sure that you can engage those buyers and build that brand presence. So when they are ready to go, you're top of mind for them. And then that conversation becomes so much easier. The demand capture becomes so much easier and the conversion pathway is much more straightforward as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's like, if you're not building the brand, you're not even in consideration when they start reaching out. So great point, Michael. Amy, any recommendations you have for marketing leaders?
Yeah, I'll build on what Michael said. I mean, in B2B especially, only 5% of the market is in market at any given time. So if you think about it in that way, and again, marketing has a real story to tell in terms of brand, but also leadership is reluctant and reticent sometimes to devote money and energy to brand activities. But brand is really actually more important and demand than actual lead generation in many cases. So, one, make sure that you're not sort of, don't look at the tree rather than the forest in this sense. Focus on both. Two, that alignment to goals is really critical, and having metrics, as we discussed, as well as a way to convey and communicate those metrics is really key. And make sure that there is a common language, because as everyone is involved in demand generation and brand, they're also involved in pipeline generation. And so having everyone be on the same page and having regular communication about where you are, how you're going to get there, and what barriers or challenges you're having, I think is really key to just having success in both lead and demand generation.
Great. Well, Amy and Michael, thank you so much. This has been not only a pleasure, but also a great learning experience. And I think for everybody, it was something to learn here today. So thank you for a great talk today.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did the first time around, and even more maybe the second time around. Amy and Michael are just so impressive. And honestly, listening back to it, I'm really struck by how relevant it still is. I want to give you 4 key takeaways and then talk a little bit about how you can apply AI to take action on some of these things. So takeaway number 1, pipeline is everyone's job, but only if everyone speaks the same language. Amy made this point really clearly. The collaborative scorecard only works if marketing, sales, and BDRs and customer success are all using the same definitions, same metrics, and crucially, translating those metrics into business language that leadership actually cares about and believes. So it's not MQLs, it's not impressions, it's pipeline value in dollars, it's revenue potential, and that's what gets you a seat at the table. Takeaway 2, the Ron Weasley problem is real. So I love this framing. Your BDRs need role clarity, and in a long, complex healthcare sale, they almost always do better sitting inside the marketing org. And I know that's controversial, but it really works. They're not closers, they're relationship starters. And when they're set up that way, the early engagement they create, the LinkedIn touches, the conference conversations, shows up months later in as pipeline. And Michael saw that happen firsthand as he recounted. Takeaway 3, brand is not optional. It's upstream pipeline. Only 5% of your marketing is at best is hitting buyers who are in market, who are in an actual buying mode at any given moment. 5%. So if you're not building brand presence with the other 95 of the buyers, you're not going to be at the top of the list. You're invisible when they're finally ready to start their buying process. So Michael said it, and I completely agree. If you're not in the consideration set before they start reaching out, you've already lost. Brand isn't soft. It's pipeline insurance. Takeaway 4, the goal isn't more pipeline, it's smarter pipeline. Amy really put it well. It can actually be more valuable to retain one customer than to push 10 new leads into the funnel. The math often favors retention, upsell, and cross-sell over raw acquisition. It's kind of a well-known fact in marketing, but to be honest, so few of us actually really act and prioritize that. And that means being ruthlessly selective about what you push into the pipeline in the first place, and making sure your metrics reflect what actually drives company growth, not just marketing activity. Okay, so those are the 4 takeaways. Now, here's what's changed since we first recorded this episode, and it's, I think, quite significant. We now have AI tools that can help you execute on all 4 of these in ways that just simply weren't there a couple of years ago and really were just not easy to use at the time that we recorded it. I mean, let's face it, we've all been using AI for content development, but not that many of us have actually taken the step to using AI for pipeline growth. So let me dig into this a bit. On the lead scoring and pipeline prioritization front, this is where things are starting to get genuinely pretty exciting. So if you've listened to our recent episodes with Chris Marin from Inovalon, you'll know that he has built what he calls an agentic opportunity scoring system. The idea is straightforward enough. Instead of static lead scoring sitting in your Marketo instance, you have agents continuously pulling in signal intelligence, things like persona fit, company level ICP data, intent signals from tools like Demandbase and Bombora, historical conversion rates by channel, and then generating a probability score plus a narrative, an actual story that tells the salesperson why this lead is worth pursuing right now. And because it stamps the record and feeds outcomes back in, the system gets smarter over time. That's not a dashboard, that's a learning loop. And that is directly addressing what Michael and Amy were talking about, knowing not just who's in your pipeline, but who you should actually be spending time on. On the content and brand building side, this is where Claude and tools like Claude Cowork come in. I'm really excited about Claude Cowork. Building the kind of consistent, high quality brand content that keeps you top of mind with that 95%, the people who aren't ready to buy yet. And this has always been resource intensive. Now, it doesn't have to be. You can use Claude to help draft thought leadership, repurpose long form content into multiple formats, maintain brand voice consistency across the whole team. And if you're using something like Claude Cowork, you can start to automate parts of that workflow so your team is spending time on judgment and creativity, not on the mundane bits of it like production. And on the scoreboard and reporting side, honestly, building that shared language across teams, translating marketing tactics into executive-ready business impact, that's something AI could genuinely help you accelerate. Whether it's helping you structure the framework, whether it's helping you draft the narrative around the numbers, or generate the insights that sit behind the dashboard, you don't have to start from scratch with every reporting cycle. So start to think about how you can use AI and tools like Claude Cowork to automate that process. The through line of all of this, and it's something that both Amy and Michael touched on, and something I've heard consistently from leaders like Nick Panay and Chris Marin, is that AI doesn't replace the strategic thinking. It removes the friction that stops you from doing it at scale. Pipeline acceleration was always about showing up consistently with the right message to the right people before they even know they needed you. AI just makes it possible to actually do that more easily. Okay, if this episode sparks something for you, I'd love to hear about it. Reach out to me on LinkedIn or drop me a note at adam@healthlaunchpad.com. And if you want to have a chat, nothing for sale here, you can book a call with me through the link down below. And hey, if you think anybody in your network would enjoy this, please go ahead and share it. And do hit the subscribe button. Anyway, with that, thanks for listening and see you next time.